You blinked, and the world quietly shifted. One night raid, one dictator removed, and suddenly the global chessboard looks different. Analysts rushed to say this was reckless, destabilizing, a green light for chaos. They missed the point. Power today is not about permission. It's about perception, about whether rivals believe you are willing to act. Donald Trump just answered that question loudly, not with speeches, not with summits, but with action, from Caracas to Beijing, from Moscow to Tehran. Leaders are recalculating risk because unpredictability is a weapon, and energy is leverage, and fear travels faster than diplomacy. If you want to understand why this single move may reshape alliances, markets, and wars far beyond Venezuela, stay with me. This story isn't about a raid, it's about a system under stress. And if this kind of analysis helps you see the world more clearly, make sure you stay connected. What comes next matters. Now, let's slow down for just a moment and define the real problem we're looking at. What really happened in Venezuela is being misunderstood. This was not regime change in the old sense, not democracy exported at gunpoint, not a replay of the Cold War. It was something colder, more surgical, a test of the system. For years, the global order has drifted into a strange illusion that power is restrained by norms, that great states wait their turn, that escalation is optional. But Xi Jinping does not wait for permission, neither does Vladimir Putin. They act, then dare others to respond. The question was never whether rules would be broken. The question was who would break them first. By extracting Nicolas Maduro, the United States didn't just remove a man, it injected uncertainty into every capital that depends on defiance for survival. This is the core issue. Not Venezuela, not Latin America, but whether shock, not stability, has become the dominant currency of power. To understand why this matters, we have to go backward, into the roots of how this system decayed. Underneath this moment lies a long decay. For decades, American power followed a script. Intervene carefully, signal restraint, avoid shocks. That approach worked in a slower world. A world of stable alliances, predictable energy flows, clear red lines, but that world eroded. Authoritarian states learned how to game the system. They stayed just below the threshold of response. They violated norms incrementally. Crimea, South China Sea, proxy wars, energy coercion, each move small enough to be tolerated, each silence interpreted as weakness. Venezuela became part of this pattern, a fortified outpost, protected by Russia, China, Iran, and Cuba. An oil state weaponized against American influence. Over time, the system rewarded obstruction, it punished decisiveness, risk aversion became doctrine. Until it didn't. Trump entered this decayed order with no attachment to its habits, no reverence for precedent. He saw not a balance to preserve, but leverage to exploit, and leverage in geopolitics accumulates quietly until one strike converts it into shock. That shock is what we're witnessing now, and its first aftershock came immediately. The first tremor wasn't global, it was local and violent in its implications. The removal of Nicolas Maduro was not clean symbolism, it was a live gamble. Instead of handing power to the Democratic opposition, Trump and Marco Rubio made a colder choice. They kept the machinery intact. Stability over idealism. Order over moral satisfaction. A dangerous bet because systems don't collapse politely. They fracture, they spill blood. Yet something unexpected happened. Delcy Rodriguez, Maduro's own vice president, stepped forward, not in defiance, but in negotiation. American officials appeared in Caracas quietly, deliberately. The Cubans, Russians, and Chinese, once omnipresent, fell strangely silent. Political prisoners began to walk free. And then came the real signal. Oil. The Venezuelan oil industry, long paralyzed, is being revived with U.S. companies. Soon, crude will flood global markets. This wasn't regime change, it was system capture. If this surprises you, pause here, because the real story isn't visible yet. What you're seeing is not chaos, it's design. The hidden mechanism here is leverage, not moral leverage, not diplomatic leverage, energy leverage. Venezuela sits on oil that the world needs. For years, that oil was locked away. Sanctions, mismanagement, foreign manipulation. By reopening that valve, Trump didn't just help one country. He altered the pressure inside the entire system. Oil prices move politics. They reward some regimes, they suffocate others. Flood the market, and exporters feel pain. Constrain supply, and authoritarians breathe easier. This is why the raid mattered. The tactical action removed a node. The strategic effect rippled outward. Russia, dependent on high energy prices, feels stress. Iran, already cornered, loses another shadow ally. China, accustomed to cheap Venezuelan crude, faces loss. This is how modern power works. Not occupation, not conquest, but selective disruption. One move that forces everyone else to adjust. And once the mechanism is exposed, the reactions become predictable. The next shock didn't come from Caracas, it came from a smaller island. The next crisis unfolded quietly, but its consequences are brutal. Cuba built its survival on someone else's oil, Venezuelan oil. Bartered, subsidized, reliable, that lifeline is gone. The raid didn't just remove Maduro, it severed Havana's energy artery. Cuba imports almost all of its fuel. It has no foreign currency to replace it, no buffer, no plan B. Its military and intelligence services, once guarding Maduro, were neutralized with humiliating ease. A psychological shock as much as a tactical one. Darkness follows fuel shortages. Factories stall, communications falter, control weakens. Trump understood this pressure point. His message was blunt, public, unambiguous. No more oil, no more money, zero, nothing is guaranteed. But militaries don't run on ideology, they run on fuel. If Cuban generals believe their equipment will stop within weeks, loyalty becomes negotiable. This is escalation without invasion, collapse without bombs. And every regime watching took note, because if this can happen to Cuba, it can happen anywhere. And for ordinary people, this is where the story begins to feel personal. For people on the ground, power games aren't abstract. They land on kitchens, on paychecks, on whether the lights stay on. If you live in Latin America, you felt the shock immediately. Governments did too. For years, defying Washington felt safe, cost-free, almost fashionable. Not anymore. Conservative leaders openly applauded U.S. action, something once unthinkable. Others panicked quietly. Gustavo Petro in Colombia heard the message. A former guerrilla, now a president, suddenly aware of proximity. He received reassurance and a White House invitation. Daniel Ortega in Nicaragua released political prisoners, canceled celebrations, lowered his profile. These aren't coincidences. They're survival instincts. And if you're an ordinary citizen, this matters more than ideology, because when regimes feel pressure, they change behavior. Repression eases. Prison doors open. Fear loosens its grip. You don't need to love American power to recognize leverage when it works. You just need to notice who is suddenly listening. If you're still with me, take a moment. Share this, because understanding power is the first step to surviving it. But the shock didn't stop at the Americas. It jumped oceans. Across the world, capitals began to recalibrate. In Beijing, the message landed hard. Venezuela was not just an ally, it was an asset. Cheap oil, strategic depth, a foothold in America's backyard. That is now at risk. 800,000 barrels per day oil China counted on may vanish from its ledger. along with what was once called a $100 billion gamble on Venezuelan loyalty. Worse, the raid exposed something unsettling. Chinese air defenses around Maduro's compound were neutralized, quickly, cleanly. When Xi Jinping calculates the cost of Taiwan, he counts ships, planes, missiles. Now he must count vulnerability, not just abroad, but at home. In Tehran, the lesson cut deeper. Venezuela had become a playground for Iran and its proxies. That door slammed shut. Protesters in Iran noticed. They saw what happens when protection evaporates. Even Europe watched, helpless, muttering about rules, asking about debt payments, irrelevance made visible. This is how shocks travel, not as explosions, but as recalculations, and the most complicated reckoning is still ahead. What comes next is not destiny, it's choice. From here, three futures unfold. The first is stabilization. Oil flows freely, prices fall, pressure builds on exporters who thrive on scarcity. Russia feels the squeeze, sanctions bite harder. Peace in Ukraine becomes negotiable, not noble but necessary. The second future is managed chaos. Energy markets swing, authoritarian regimes adapt, they survive, but weaker, more cautious, less adventurous. The system stays tense, but controllable. The third is escalation, miscalculation. A leader mistakes shock for weakness, responds with force. The ladder of risk climbs too fast. This is the paradox of disruption. Shock restores deterrence, but it also compresses decision time. Trump's strategy gambles that fear will discipline power, that leverage will outpace ego, that tactical blows can keep generating strategic space. History offers no guarantees, only patterns, and the pattern here is unmistakable. The age of slow decline is over, the age of sudden turns has begun. What matters now is not who rules Venezuela, but whether the world has learned the new rules. Because the final lesson is not about power, it's about what we do with it. Nothing about this moment is normal. A single raid, a single decision, and suddenly systems that looked immovable begin to bend. This is the world after restraint, where power is no longer performed through patience, but through credibility, through the willingness to act when others hesitate. You don't have to admire Donald Trump to recognize the shift. You only have to observe behavior. Regimes recalculating, alliances loosening, energy rewriting diplomacy. The rules didn't disappear. They were outpaced. And that leaves one final question, not for presidents, for you. In a world shaped by shocks, are you still thinking in slow time? Do you understand where leverage really lives? And who knows how to use it? Because the next move will not announce itself, it will arrive suddenly, and it will matter. If this analysis sharpened how you see power, stay here. Subscribe, share it with someone who still believes the old world is intact. The next chapter is already forming, and understanding it may be the only real advantage left. This story isn't over, it's just accelerating.